Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our next Fireside Chat with somebody that I'm really excited to hear from because I'm born and raised Calgarian. We have with us today Minister Rajan Sawhney, who was appointed as Alberta's Minister of Community and Social Services on April 30th, 2019. So a couple years of experience under her belt in this particular portfolio, but she was most recently appointed as the new Transportation Minister on July 8th, 2021, which is what we're really interested and excited to hear about. Minister Sawhney, welcome to our virtual platform and our virtual national and international conference on rail technologies. Just by way of introduction, I'm going to say that you were born and raised in Northeast Calgary. So was I. I'm a Marlborough Park woman, and it sounds like you're from not too far away from where I am. So we have a shared commitment to probably improving transit, transportation, and mobility for Calgarians, but also Albertans across the country. And so with that, I'd really like to turn the virtual microphone over to you, Minister Sawhney, for a kind of a check-in on what is the future landscape of rail or transportation mobility in Alberta.
Thank you, Yusuf. And first of all, let me say that I'm delighted to hear that you're also from Calgary. I had no idea. It's a Calgary thing. We're always happy to meet other people from our hometown. Yes, born and raised in this beautiful city. And I can honestly say that I have virtually witnessed with my own eyes the evolution of the transit system. I remember very well growing up and watching the LRT being constructed very close to my home where I lived in Rundle. But in answer to your question, I have to say that this is a very fascinating portfolio. I've been in this portfolio for a few months, and I've had the opportunity to speak to many stakeholders that are looking at transit and rail opportunities within the province right now. So we are talking about the possibility for high-speed rail between Edmonton and Calgary, and that's a very exciting project. It percolates every couple of years. It gets discussed, and then it kind of gets shelved for another couple of years. But I think the time is now to really talk about feasibility and understand what that could look like. We have also reviewed a proposal for Calgary Banff Rail, and that is also very exciting because we're thinking about looking at possibilities of hydrogen-powered rail as well. And it's still in the early stages in terms of assessment, but it has been announced. It's a partnership with the Canada Infrastructure Bank as well, and we have signed an agreement to potentially assess this project a little bit further. And then, of course, there's Transpod, which is very, very exciting. It's a little bit out there. And I know when I talk about it with folks, they're actually thinking, is this something that's just out of, science fiction movies? And I said, you know what? The technology is being developed right now. And there is a company that we are speaking to, actually, that very closely in terms of looking at Alberta as a place where they could potentially test out this new technology. So there are so many things that are happening in the province right now on the rail side, and I haven't even started speaking about the Green Line in Calgary and all of the investments that are taking place in Edmonton, but I know that we'll get into that. But transportation isn't just about rail, obviously. We are looking at investments in our infrastructure, in highways and dams and bridges. I was very pleased to announce the first steps in the Springbank Reservoir Dam project. We had just finished signing off some agreements there. It was a very contentious project that was first proposed in 2014. So the fact that we have signed off on some land acquisition is phenomenal. And of course, I could go on, but maybe I'll pause there because the next topic would be trucking, and that could take at least an hour and a half.
Absolutely. I mean, fantastic kind of panoply and spectrum of all the things you're working to deal with. I'm going to take it back a little bit and start high level, and then we're going to dig deep into some of the things you did mention, like the Calgary Banff line, which frankly, I think the first time I heard about that was grade 5. Right, in St. Martha's schooling in Calgary Northeast. Like, we've been talking about this stuff for decades, and when will it come? It sounds like maybe that day is coming soon. So we're going to get into that. But first, let me pull it back a little bit. Mr. Sawhney, I know you've been a real community activist for many, many years, including the fact that you have been recognized by the YMCA in terms of getting an award for some of your community activism. You've been really passionate about community projects, and you've had a lot of leadership roles in nonprofit organizations. And now you're in this transportation portfolio. And, from a QTRIC perspective, from our perspective and my own, mobility and transit and transportation, the ability to get around is really the core of a person's ability to earn an income and live a good life. So can you walk us through how your experience in community activism and all of those nonprofit leadership roles you played is now shaping the way that you are looking at rail, transit, mobility, and maybe even freight supply chain, but mostly we're looking at the passenger mobility landscape. How have those community activist experiences shaped you?
Well, I'm really glad you asked that question, and I wasn't really anticipating that question, but I do have a lot to say about this because the previous portfolio that I worked in was community and social services. And one of the items that I'm very proud of that we maintained was the low income transit pass, because we know that transportation is a social determinant of health. Not only is it important for employment purposes, but just to be able to get around for seniors and for people who have disabilities. Transportation, accessible, low-cost transportation is very important. So I was able to maintain that funding in recognition of that. And of course, all of the projects that we're working on right now are going to create jobs. They're going to create employment. And one of the other aspects that I'm very, very keen on is trying to find ways to increase the employment of women in this sector. So not only in these projects that we're talking about right now, but in terms of labor, like we know we have a significant labor shortage in the trucking industry, for example, and there are many opportunities for women and other less represented groups to participate in those particular job categories. So what I have learned throughout my life in terms of activism and what I've learned in my previous portfolio indicate that there is a niche within transportation to make sure that we tackle pressing social issues, the ones that we're seeing today. So as I navigate through some of these projects and as I think about signing off on some of these more important and exciting projects, like potentially Calgary Banff Rail or high-speed rail from Edmonton to Calgary, I will have that aspect in mind as well, in terms of how can we support women and how does this advance some of our socio-economic objectives.
I couldn't agree more with you. I mean, the reality is, especially from a public transit perspective, we know that it gets women around. And we know that it gets communities that identifies visible minorities around. And that means it gets them to jobs and freedom because they're able to earn an income. It was certainly the truth for my family and myself and my mother. So I really support this idea of making sure that there's jobs for women in the space, but that transportation is also designed around women and communities of color. Having gone into that, then let's dig deep into some of these exciting investments you talked about. I'm going to go over to Edmonton. And despite the Calgary-Edmonton rivalry, I lived in Edmonton for a number of years and I love it as well. And the LRT, it's great. There's a real cultural ethos to Edmonton. Edmonton has a whole number of exciting municipal rail line expansion plans ahead. And in terms of being an urban center in a challenging climate, these are really critical to the mobility of Albertans. And so I'm just going to list off a few: the Valley Line West LRT in Edmonton, the Valley Line Southeast LRT, and Capital Line LRT expansion south, and the Metro Line extension. I mean, this is a lot of projects in Edmonton that I think collectively represent billions of dollars of investment. Can you walk us through an update on where these investments are, to the extent they've become part of your portfolio, and whether the pandemic has slowed down any of those investments, and perhaps what they mean for the communities in terms of LRT mobility?
You are absolutely right. We are investing billions of dollars in Edmonton from the provincial perspective. And what it means, again, it's jobs. It means it's stimulus. We're getting people back to work. And we're also creating much needed infrastructure. I had mentioned earlier that transportation is a social determinant of health. And we know that there are many communities, on the suburbs who don't have access to these kinds of opportunities to take the LRT. So in terms of the projects, well, we've got the Valley Line West LRT, and unlike yourself, I haven't had the benefit of actually living in Edmonton. I mean, I'm in and out at the legislature, but I did take the opportunity to drive around the city and try to see these projects up close. So happy to give an update. So the Valley Line West LRT project is in the final stage of construction, and it involves extending the line by approximately 14 kilometers from 102 Street downtown to Lewis Farms. That's probably too much detail, and I'm not going to go into that much detail for the other lakes, but There have been some delays in answer to your question as well. That's just a reality. And we've seen that everywhere in terms of the construction industry. We're seeing what I had mentioned before, some labor shortages, and the supply chain issues are real. Steel is hard to access. There are other materials that are required in the construction of these projects that have also been bottlenecked as we try to navigate through these projects. But I can tell you that the Metro Line Northwest LRT project, for example, is well underway. And we do expect to have that particular project to be completed by 2024-25. So there's lots of activity going around in the city of Edmonton. And I know that the residents are very excited to get regular updates on these projects. So we do put more updates on our website. And that's why I don't want to get into all of the details at a granular level. I'm sure our listeners don't necessarily want to hear all of those details, but everything is on our website. So things are chugging along in Edmonton, and it's quite exciting when you drive by to see all the progress.
Well, that is great. But I will say, we're a bunch of geeks over here at Q-Trick. I'm pretty sure our audience is full of a bunch of rail geeks and transportation geeks too. So the details matter, and that is very helpful. But folks, if you are looking for more info, definitely go to the Alberta website, the Alberta government website, and the ministry website for those details on LRT. I'm going to shift over now back to Calgary. Calgary has been in the news lately, certainly during the federal election recently. If we were to dive deep into that issue around rail service in Calgary, it's a major discussion topic around the water cooler, virtually speaking. Calgary's Green Line is approaching almost 700 million as far as the project goes. And the majority of that has really been on design work and engineering and prep work and land acquisition, all of that. But it is a $5.5 billion project, massive, with the government of Canada, the province and the city. And if it goes ahead, I believe that it will be the largest, most expensive infrastructure investment in the city's history. And during the last federal election, there were some pros and cons that were raised again. It became a political issue to some extent. In your role as Minister of Transportation, can you walk us through what some of the challenges have been around the Green Line and how those challenges are going to be overcome? And, I'll say this just underscoring the fact that although I'm right now in Calgary, joining you right now from Calgary, my family lives in Chestermere, and it's nearly impossible to get from Chestermere to Calgary. And some of those growing areas around Calgary, like Okotoks and so on, it's really hard to get through public transit into the city. But the growth of the Green Line helps to expand that rail mobility, which then one would think down the road creates that culture of wanting to expand into regional rail. So it's a really important topic beyond just the politics of it in the short term. Can you walk us through those pros and cons, those challenges that have come up, and how the province is going to overcome those challenges with the Green Line?
Sure. And you're correct when you say that this has been a contentious topic, and it has been for a number of different years. And the province is committed to spending about $1.53 billion on this particular project, and it is a $5.5 billion project in total. Now, some of the issues that arose initially were, and I can tell you just even from my constituency, like, why does the Green Line stop right now according to the city's plan where it does? Why is it not extended up north as well? Because to your point, there's so many growing communities around the suburbs. We have Chestermere, we have Airdrie, and we have all of the growth that's taking place in Calgary. And yet such an expensive infrastructure project still isn't meeting the needs of a significant number of communities. But nonetheless, it is what it is. We've gone around this topic many, many times, and the city finally did submit a plan. And when it did come to the province, it was subject to review because there were some concerns about particular elements of that plan. And as that review took place, unfortunately, it did take place over a year. And what that meant was another delay. And it also meant cost escalation as well for materials. But ultimately, the plan was sent back to the city, and they made some changes, and then we submitted it after approvals. And now it's just sitting, everything is sitting with the federal government. And we received a letter from the deputy minister saying that we should be getting final approval soon. But the good news is that we do have a CEO who is overseeing the whole project, Mr. Darshpreet Patti, and he did announce last week that a Spanish railway car manufacturer for the Green Line was selected as a C-Train contractor. So this is a good news story, yes, because we are on the path to getting some construction done. So The Green Line, again, we know that it's important for Albertans because it will ultimately create about 20,000 jobs in the Calgary region. And that also means that, more access to employment and more access for Calgarians to health services and just generally being able to get around more easily. And also, when you create these projects, I never even mentioned that, it's beneficial for the environment. It's a reduction in GHGs, and all of those associated impacts are reduced.
There's no doubt. I mean, coming out of COP26, it's pretty clear we need urgent action, but that is a hackneyed kind of cliched term. What does that mean? Well, it means building a lot of rail, a lot of LRT, a lot of mobility. So it's great to hear those updates about the Green Line. And as you noted, delays come with democracies, but at least everybody's on the right page about moving forward with those investments. So I will be excited to ride the expanded LRT in upcoming years with my niece and nephew so they can become subscribers to the system. I'm going to now shift over to what we've all been talking about for decades, for as long as I can remember. For the love of humanity, somebody build a rail line between the airport and Banff, that discussion. And I think, I remember talking about this decades ago. You remember it. It's been around town. And the longest debate has been the ridership's not there. So you can't build it and they will come if the ridership's not there. That's starting to change. And climate action is starting to change that narrative. Congestion is, and demand by the public. So this is, for folks who aren't aware, it's this proposed 150-kilometer long passenger railway service between Calgary International Airport and Banff Railway Station. It's exciting for skiers, but it's also exciting for anybody who wants to get to the great outdoors of Banff National Park. Now, if we watch this project from afar, there's a lot of twinning of the Canadian Pacific Railway corridor being proposed as part of the solution. It should be some kind of hassle-free passenger mobility corridor with freight movement as well. And from what we understand, of course, the government of Alberta's Ministry of Transportation and the Canada Infrastructure Bank and Invest Alberta are all holding hands together to try to make this happen. Now, what we understand is that it's supposed to be operational by 2025. But we also know that it's a large billion-dollar investment and rail is hard to build on schedule in the best of times. Can you walk us through your insights into the project, and is it still feasible that we could have this built and operational by 2025?
Well, I love the way you said that the CIB and Alberta Transportation and Invest Alberta are all holding hands on this project, because it is true. We did sign an MOU back in February of 2020 because there is merit in assessing the project further, just to understand what is it going to take. Now, the reason why we've been talking about it for years and years and years and nothing has happened is because it's not easy. There is considerable risk associated with a project of this size. And you mentioned ridership. That is one aspect. And, some people say you build it and ridership will come. And I was asking one of my deputy ministers the other day, I said, give me an example of that. Give me an example of something we've done recently where we've built it and the ridership has come, and we're still trying to sort that out. There is also the question of CP's role in this as well. We would have to liaise very closely with them just to get an understanding of where they would be, because they would be a significant partner. But there is no doubt that this project, like on paper and in our mind, seems like it's something that we should definitely be pursuing, because it has impacts on tourism. Like, imagine having a rail directly from Calgary Airport all the way to Banff that stops in Calgary downtown, that stops in Cochrane, in Canmore. The accessibility of all of these different municipalities for tourists is very compelling, right? So from the tourist perspective, there's a definite value proposition there. And so right now, where I'm at, as I'd mentioned, we have signed the MOU and we are just doing additional assessments within the department just to make sure that the economics are there. As wonderful as this sounds, and as much as we say that, it's going to connect people to different destinations in a way that's never been done before, there are the very practical realities of, are the economics going to support this? Is this going to require long-term government subsidization? The other exciting aspect of this project was hydrogen-powered rail. And that is something that we're all talking about right now in the province, actually, the concept of hydrogen anything, hydrogen-powered trucks, hydrogen fuel cell-powered rail. We do have a blueprint it's called a roadmap, not a blueprint, that was announced recently by the government of Alberta in terms of wanting to really look at hydrogen projects. So this was also something that was indicated as part of the Calgary Banff Rail project, that we would be looking at the role of a hydrogen-powered rail. Because again, that has an impact on the environment, lower greenhouse gas emissions. And it's all very exciting. The technology isn't there yet. It hasn't quite been proven, but I'm keeping a very close eye on the horizon to see what that could potentially look like. So just to circle back to the final message, I guess, around Calgary Banff Rail is that we're still assessing the feasibility. We know that Albertans have been wanting to see this for a long time. We know that the tourism industry would benefit, and we know it's good for the environment, but ultimately the economics have to support the project.
And, maybe I'll segue on that. The reality is, if that such a line were created, it wouldn't just be for tourists. I mean, getting to Banff National Park is really expensive. You have to own a car, and there's not that many buses that get you there. So there is a possibility that it could be a social equalizer. But as you say, you need the clientele. And I've said this to a few ministers. I know you folks can't really easily say it. It's not politically palatable, but I say it. Road pricing is a way to drive people out of their cars and right into rail. But that is a policy issue that has to be discussed at a higher social level. Within that, then we're going to segue to the final question, Minister, in the few minutes we have. The next big project is, of course, Hyperloop. And if we think building rail from Calgary to Banff is expensive, well, we know Hyperloop is extremely expensive, multi-billion-dollar initiative. Folks are proposing something like Calgary to Red Deer. It is great. It's exciting. It's innovative. It would move people really fast and give them a reason to get off the highway and into a low carbon mobility mode. But is the ridership there, and how do we create the economics? So can you walk us through what your thoughts are about Hyperloop, and then also what can be done to drive that ridership into these kind of more expensive infrastructure plays up front?
Yes, so I was just reflecting on your comments about social equalizer, and any of these rail projects definitely would accomplish that goal. And that's really important, because we are seeing all kinds, especially throughout the pandemic, just to backtrack, we are seeing all kinds of social issues that arise, and people don't have access to the things like national parks and other destinations like that. So the social equalizer aspect is compelling, and it's certainly something that is at the forefront of my mind as I look at these projects as well. Because you're right, it isn't just about tourism, it's about having the opportunity to connect people to destinations that they can't get easily to right now. But the Hyperloop project is very interesting, and I must admit that when I first saw it, I was quite intrigued, and I was even wondering, is it doable? But I had a great discussion with the CEO, Sebastian. I have his name written here, Gendron, and I said to him as well. I said, "Tell me, how is this going to work? How is it going to be even feasible from a dollars and cents perspective?" I mean, the technology is very intriguing, and they're testing it out right now. And he said that they've done significant work in terms of feasibility, just to understand what the revenue generation is going to look like and what the operating costs are. So I'm just waiting to see some of that reporting come back to me so I could have a look at it. But in terms of the concept, I was watching their YouTube video a few weeks ago, and I just pulled it up again today. And what they talk about when they talk about Hyperloop is they say it's like designing a spacecraft that's constructed like an airplane and operates like a train. And so they're trying to create an option that competes with the airlines. And what we've been seeing in Alberta right now is that we have the ultra low cost carriers actually expanding their services to different destinations across the country and even within the province. So it's going to be an interesting dynamic as the airline industry and the aviation industry begins to expand. How is that going to interact? What are the dynamics going to be like with projects like whether it's a Hyperloop or whether it's high-speed rail? The ridership is a ridership. There's only one ridership, and what are they going to choose at the end of the day? So it's a very dynamic environment right now, and I am very happy to support any of these initiatives that are coming our way in terms of feasibility and study. And I think the best part of the high-speed rail projects and the Hyperloop project right now is that they're not asking for government subsidies. That's important because these are taxpayer dollars at the end of the day, and happy to support where required. But again, I just go back to the value proposition. It has to be there, and the companies have to demonstrate that the feasibility is there. We are happy to look at the regulatory environment and step out of the way as required. But beyond that, investing in, I guess, projects that are going to require significant subsidization over the decades is a bit of a red flag.
Well, Minister Sawhney, I mean, just recently I took my 9-year-old niece and nephew to West Edmonton Mall for her birthday. And I really would have loved to be able to take them on a train or a Hyperloop that got me there so that we didn't have to drive on that highway for 3.5 hours when you're tired and you just want to gab and have a coffee and whatnot. And in the interest of climate action, there's a lot of motivation behind rail or even Hyperloop to avoid those air flights, right? Those short haul flights that are very polluting. So a lot of possibility here, and Alberta is the landscape of the innovative, and we know that your province is looking at diversifying the economy going forward for the 21st century, and this is part and parcel of that. So I want to thank you for your time, for your expertise, and for your passion. And I have to say, I believe some of your background is in hydraulic fracturing, if I'm not sure. So if we can drill down, drill horizontal, and make stuff bubble up to the surface, and we can make that happen from an engineering perspective and frack natural resources out of ground that we never thought we could, I am sure that we have the brains and talent to create high-speed, high-frequent rail across Alberta or even Hyperloop. So with leadership like yours, we're really excited about the future.
I agree. We are very entrepreneurial, and the technology has advanced so much in so many different directions. And of course, that's why we are looking at all of these projects in tandem, because we believe something can happen, and we are encouraging anybody who wants to invest in this space to please come to Alberta, and we will help you out, and we will look at everything that comes our way. So rest assured, I feel the same way. I'm a mother of 4, and I spend a lot of time on the highways, a ton of time. There's no one who would prefer high-speed rail more than I do, and some of my other elected officials, because we travel quite frequently from across the province to get to Edmonton. So it would be something that would be in the public good and a social benefit to so many people, and we are working on it as we speak.
That's fantastic. So you, me, a cup of coffee, and hopefully a high-speed rail trip to Banff at some point in the future. I want to thank you. Yeah, it would be fantastic. So thanks so much, Mr. Sawhney, for your time again, and we look forward to seeing you again next year.
Thank you, Yusipa. It was great to meet you.
Thanks so much. Take care.